So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining our Fireside chat with Josh Balk community call. My name is Sophia Balderson. I'm the co-founder of Impactful Animal Advocacy. We are a community building organization that's improving collaboration and coordination in the farmed animal advocacy movement. And today I have the absolute privilege to host Josh Balk from the Accountability Board. And the reason why we decided to host this meetup is because I learned about Josh's work last year. And you can see this graph that, we all asked you a question, whether you've heard about Josh's work. And you can see that half of you have, but half of you haven't. And I was in that haven't group. And I was like, wow, like, this is not very good, Sophia. Like, you should have known about this. And then I was so inspired, and I started talking to people about Josh's work. And apparently, not everyone knew about it. And I was like, wow, I want everyone to know about this strategy. This is so cool. And Josh, like, I would really like to say every time I see your updates in my inbox and just like whenever you post, I just get so inspired. And I was like, I really want other advocates to also have that. So this is why we're hosting this meetup. And you can see that we all have a lot to learn. I hope that if you are all some of you have heard of Josh's work, then maybe you'll also learn too, because we have some really insightful questions prepared. I would like to give a shout out to our comms lead, Alison, for helping me to prepare and to moderate this call. Thank you so much, Alison. And of course, thank you so much, Josh, for coming. So I'm going to just do a quick introduction to Josh. So as some of you may know, Josh is the co-founder and CEO of the Accountability Board, which is an organization that utilizes shareholder engagement to advance animal welfare and other issues with the world's largest corporations like McDonald's, Kroger, Walmart, Burger King, and more than 100 others. So how amazing is that? So previously, Josh worked as Vice President of Farmed Animal Protection at the Humane Society of the United States, where he led the passage of a dozen state laws helping egg-laying hens, mother pigs, and veal calves, including the historic Californian Proposition 12. And this is like super recent, amazing victory. Big congratulations again. He's also led corporate negotiations with the largest food companies to enact animal welfare. And one of the most exciting things about Josh is actually that Josh is the co-founder at Eat Just, which is like an amazing alternative protein product. I'm not sure if you tried it. If you haven't, please do. And this company is the maker of Just Egg, and the first company to ever sell cultivated meat in the world. And also, Josh worked at Animal Outlook, where he did undercover investigation at chicken slaughterhouses and factory farms. So, Josh, what haven't you done? You obviously haven't had your jokes career. So, welcome, Josh. Thank you so much for coming. It's a real privilege. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and maybe some of your background?
Sophia, I'm honored to be here with you and so many friends and new friends and people I respect. I'm really honored to be on this call with everybody today. And I think I started probably like so many of you, just starting in my home with my dog. I grew up with a dog named Hector, who was a giant Saint Bernard, about the size of a bear. I loved him so much, like I'm sure so many of you love your dog or cat at home. And just like probably many of you, I just made that connection, like why love my dog and ignore the suffering of all these other animals, especially when I was in high school, when I saw a documentary on a VHS tape. I don't know how many of you all remember those VHS tapes back in the day, but I saw a documentary when I was a junior in high school showing how animals are raised for food, how they're killed in slaughterhouses. And that's when I became vegetarian, thinking of, hey, if that was my dog, Hector, I would be outraged. I would do everything in my power to save him. Yet look what happens to all these other animals who have the same capacity to feel pain, suffer like Hector does. And a few years later became vegan. And I knew the whole time I wanted to devote my life for animals. And so I've had the opportunity to. And Sophia, thanks for going down some of the things I've been able to do in my life. And happy to answer any questions that you have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that quick introduction. You're such a humble person, Josh. That's something else you need to know about Josh. Yeah, just a couple of housekeeping rules. So if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat and we'll address them in the Q&A segment. But now we're just going to get started with the discussion part. So I'm quite curious, Josh, to hear more about Accountability Board, because since not everyone has heard of it, according to the event survey, I just really want you to speak a little bit more about it. Maybe you could give us a quick introduction.
Well, I don't feel too bad about half the folks not hearing of it because it hasn't been around for a long time. In fact, we've been around for maybe a year and a half or so. And here's the theory of change. If we want to help animals on a global scale, we're not going to be able to pass laws in every single country around the world. We're just not going to be able to do it, at least not in the near term. I'm very proud of the laws that I worked to pass. I'm very thrilled that others are working to pass more laws in the future, but we're not going to have the global impact just by passing laws. So how are we going to do it? And in my mind, we can do it by getting the world's largest food companies that have footprints all around the world to make changes within their supply chains. And so when you're looking at how do we affect animals in Brazil and China and Eastern Europe, and you name the place around the world, the largest food companies that we all can name at the top of our head, they have operations there. They buy their eggs and their pork from there. They have locations in all those regions. And so what does it look like if they make the changes on a global scale? And in my mind, that's how we can reduce the suffering of billions of animals. And the question is, how do we get these companies to do that? And by the way, I'm going to focus on animals for this conversation because I know a bunch of fellow animal people are on this call. This work also coincides with the environment, proper governance, and other issues that we work on. But for the sake of this call, I'm going to focus on animals. So the question is, how do we get these companies to do it? You know, as I think a lot of us have felt in our animal activism days, like calling up companies, emailing them, like you don't get too much of a response. However, what we do is we buy shares in every major publicly traded food company in the United States, Canada, Australia, UK, France, increasingly throughout the world. And we're able to utilize our power as a shareholder to push things to the highest level at a company. As we all know, the folks who have power at the company, like they're not the person who is starting at their first year and is maybe a sustainability manager who has maybe like 20 people between that person and the CEO and chair of the board. Unfortunately, that person likely doesn't have as much power as any of us would hope. The people who can actually make the decisions, those are the people we have to reach, and those are the people we have to raise our issues to. And when we are investors, we have the capacity to do it. And what we often do is something called a shareholder proposal. And what a shareholder proposal is that if you have enough money in a company, you could put something in the company's proxy. So you might be wondering, like, what the heck is a proxy, right? So, all right, I was at the Humane Society of the United States for about 18 years, and I led the farm animal team there, and we would send out an annual report about our success. And I'm sure, the other folks who are on the call who work at animal groups, you do the same thing. Hey, donor, here's how we rocked it this year. Here are all the victories and the successes, and please support us in the next years. I did that. You all probably do that too for your groups. All right, imagine if a donor could put an entire page worth of concerns about your organization in your annual report, and that report by law with a page of concerns had to go to all of your donors. And then all your donors could vote to tell you to make changes. You'd be like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. Like imagine like Sophia's organization saying, hey, our organization has been awesome this year, but there's a donor who is really upset and has an entire page saying why Sophia is doing such a bad job. So if you're like, oh my gosh, this is a nightmare, right? So That's what we are able to do, and not an annual report, but it's the proxy that goes out to all the investors. And because we have the capacity to do it, that means we have the capacity to put issues at the highest level of the company. We're talking about the board, the CEO, executives. They're the ones responsible for the proxy. They're the ones that want their proxy to be clean. Just as Sophia doesn't want things that are a bit negative about her organization to go to her donors, these companies don't want it either. So oftentimes they say, listen, and again, we're going to focus on animals for this call. Listen, Josh, what can we do? How can we address your concerns? And then we talk to them, and then we say, listen, if you do X, Y, Z, that will show enough good faith that we will withdraw our proposal, and no one will ever even know about it because we're keeping it private with you, as long as you fulfill what you have just promised. They say, hey, that makes sense. That's a deal. That's how we're able to get just tremendous advancements for animals just over the past year alone. And the last thing I'll say about this, Sophia, before I throw it back to you for any more questions, is what is good for animals is also good for shareholders. And the reason being, whether it's Citigroup or the World Bank or big private equity firms, they've all done their analysis to show that the treatment of animals is a material risk for companies. Meaning that if companies don't address animal protection issues and abuses that are going on, it's a risk to shareholders. So what we are doing is not only good for animals, it's also good for shareholders. And that's a great combination if we want to be effective.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for explaining it so clearly. Can I just clarify for myself and for everyone? So the charity annual report would kind of be the same as the company's proxy. And then when you, before they issue that proxy, you can contact the company's executives and say, I'm going to submit this, but if you do what I want, I won't submit it. So they kind of have a limited time. They have a little bit of pressure to come back to you.
They certainly do, Sophia. And listen, our preference is to work with the company to find common ground. That is certainly the preference. And you're exactly right. We file that shareholder proposal directly with the company executives before it reaches any of the investors, to give them the time, exactly what you said, to reach out to us, say, hey, can we meet? We meet, and we have numerous months to find that common ground. And when we find that common ground, it's a success for everybody. I argue, and I think that the facts are on my side, that when they make the changes that we're asking for, it is good for the shareholders. And that's an important argument to make. And of course, what we're asking also improves the treatment of animals. And our focus at this point for animals has been the confinement of egg-laying hens in cages, the confinement of mother pigs in gestation crates, and increasingly so, the treatment of broiler chickens, chickens raised for meat, all within these company supply chains.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being so clear about this. And if you have any other questions, please type them in the chat right away, and then we'll get back to them in about 12 minutes. But I'll continue quizzing Josh about your work. I wonder, because you said that you want to work with hundreds of organizations to make the biggest impact, but I wonder, how do you prioritize which companies or sectors to target?
So we have the first focus on which companies are publicly traded. That's where most of our focus is. Not all companies are. As an example, companies like Cargill, that's not publicly traded. Most egg producers are not publicly traded, as an example. They're private companies. Publicly traded are those companies that you can buy stock in Wall Street, as an example. And other countries have their version of Wall Street. So we have the first, our main focus are companies that are publicly traded. And beyond that, our focus is on the biggest companies. And that's the reason being is that they have the biggest impact for animal issues and other issues. And also, frankly, as shareholders, that's where shareholders are most concerned, are the companies that are the biggest, most high profile, and frankly, the companies that are worth the most. So it makes sense for all those reasons that we focus on the large companies. And I can tell you, just over the past past year, the type of success that we've had. Just very quickly, just a few examples. McDonald's, they've pledged to go cage-free in all their eggs. In 2015, we worked with them. I was on the Humane Society. 10 years, they said it would take to go to 100% cage-free in all their eggs in the United States. Well, doing this type of shareholder work, they now moved up their time frame by 2 years, and they've already reached 100% 2 years ahead of time in the United States. And they use 2 billion eggs a year. 2 billion eggs. As we all probably know, it takes about a day for an egg-laying hen to lay an egg, meaning that's 2 billion fewer days of suffering annually of an egg-laying hen in a cage because of McDonald's shift to cage-free. Talk about impact. Talk about impact. We recently worked with Yum Brands, one of the largest food companies in the world. They own Pizza Hut, they own KFC, to announce a policy to move away from buying pork from operations that confine pigs in gestation crates. In fact, they're going to be publishing benchmarks and when they're going to reach 100% cage-free. Another example is that, over the past year, we've gotten Compass Group, the world's largest food service company. They run the dining operations at about 40,000 colleges, universities, hospitals all around the world, to publish global benchmarks. Again, friends, global benchmarks to reach 100% cage-free. Work with Unilever, one of the largest consumer packaged good companies. They're the biggest sellers of mayonnaise. You might know Best Foods mayonnaise or Hellmann's mayonnaise. They own that, and there's eggs in all those products. We worked with them to have global benchmarks to reach 100% cage-free. So those are just some of the many dozen examples of advancements that we've been able to achieve for animals, which again, if I did not care about animals at all, I didn't care about ethics at all, and I only cared about share price and owning stock in these companies, I would think those were good things too, because we're reducing risk within the supply chain, risk that is material risk for the company that can certainly harm share price and creating a risk for investors to be shareholders within the companies.
I really love that. Thank you so much, Josh. I think that the win-win mentality is really something that, in my opinion at least, is going to help us end farmed animal suffering. But I really appreciated that you also highlighted these numbers in such an accessible way. And I feel like I'm just so impressed, as I'm sure everyone else is like, wow, this is awesome. But I'm sure that wasn't easy. So I wonder what have been your biggest learnings and your biggest challenges with this intervention? Because I bet that in a year and a half, you've already learned quite a bit.
I definitely learned quite a bit. And I got to tell you, even looking back when I started this, Sophia, about 20 years ago, working at the Humane Society, and I started doing outreach to companies, I was like, you know what, as long as people just know the truth, as long as they know what's going on, they'll make changes. Because who wants to be involved in animal cruelty? I mean, people didn't go to business school and then go work for a grocery store, or consumer packaging company, or food service company to support animal cruelty. They just, want to get involved in business, and they want to do a good job because they want to earn a living and have enough funds to be able to support their families, send their kids to college. Like, these are just normal values that people have, which are fine. And I thought, listen, just by letting them know the reality, things will change. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. In most cases with these companies, it really does take strong encouragement for companies to move forward. In fact, it takes a lot of strong encouragement for companies to move forward, even on the very commitments they've already made. When I was at the Humane Society, I worked with almost all these companies to publicly make commitments to go cage-free on their eggs or crate-free on their pork. And I was thrilled. And by the way, other groups worked on that too, and huge props to so many other animal groups who worked on that. Now, that was a good step. What at the time I thought was, okay, great, let's move on to something else now. But looking back, I realized, you know what? These companies oftentimes, not every time, oftentimes don't do anything after their initial announcement that they're eventually going to do something. They kind of just forget about it, move on. And when they're reminded, they push back as hard as they often can to not actually fulfill their very promise. So what I have noticed is that it really does take intervention for most companies to move forward, not just forget about ethics, forget about new issues. We're talking about the very issues they already promised to do. It takes intervention for these companies to move forward. And for all of us on the call that care about animals, it matters a lot. For investors who trust that when companies make commitments to them on any issue, that matters to them too. Like, wait a second, company, you promised you would do this on animals, which, by the way, reduce material risks, which is a good thing, but you're not doing that. That's a problem. You've also made these 200 other promises. What else are you not following through with? This is a real governance concern now, which is, again, why I think sometimes, and I know I felt it, sometimes we might feel like people who care about animals is up against everybody else, but we don't have to be. We can be on the same side as investors and companies that want the same thing, whether it's for ethics or companies following through with commitments, or just setting a tone that, listen, shareholders want companies to tell the truth and to follow through with commitments, and then, hey, allow them to make their decision whether to remain as an investor, but at least with the truth and understanding what's actually happening.
Wow. This is really powerful. And I think I definitely fell into the same trap. Also thinking, oh, okay, tree campaigns, let's do this. And everyone's like donating to them and thinking this is it. But I really love how you made that connection and actually did something about it. And I think what I'm really excited about for the future of the farmed animal advocacy movement is that we are becoming, I guess, much broader than just farmed animal advocates. And rather than thinking we can make change through nonprofits, we're moving much broader and thinking, no, we have to take all the positions in our society, which includes shareholders and politicians and journalists, so that we have people in all these places making change. And I think this is like the only way we can actually do this. And I think another lesson from what you just said for me is that animal advocacy, it has like so many steps, and we should never become happy or compliant just because we've achieved some kind of victory, because it's so easy to do, because like we have to self-congratulate for our donors to be happy. But I think we also need to be very transparent. So actually, yes, we have achieved this cage-free campaign, but we have all these other steps that also have to happen, and like we also have to donate towards that and work towards that. So I really love that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Decades ago in the 1980s, the animal movement was very successful putting the fur issue front and center in society. And we started seeing anti-fur policies being enacted with corporations. And we're like, wow, things are moving. Let's move on to a different issue. And what happened? Fur came back. And now a lot of us are working on that issue too, where I think if we could go back in time, we think, wait a second, that issue was not complete. And I know that I'm so proud of the success we've had. And I know that people are tuning in globally, but I'm just going to focus on the United States just for this moment. In the United States, if we were all just hanging out on a video call back 15 years ago, and we're like, hey, Josh, like what percentage of egg-laying hens were cage-free? I would have to say low single digits. And now, because of the laws that we worked to pass, like California's Proposition 12 law, and because of the corporations moving to cage-free, we've gone from low single digits to now more than 40% of the U.S. egg industry is cage-free. That's roughly 120 million egg-laying hens annually who would otherwise be confined in a cage are now living cage-free. 120 million annually. I believe Vox wrote an article saying that it's probably the greatest reduction of animal suffering that they're aware of. And if you look at mother pigs, low single digits about 15 years ago of not being confined in crates, gestation crates. Now, according to the pork industry itself, more than 40% who are no longer spending the totality of their pregnancy inside crates. So we're moving. We should be so proud of this movement. At the same time, we're not done. We're not even 50% yet. So we got to keep moving to finish this issue. And I think that there's a balance of being proud collectively what we've done together, while also knowing we have more work to do. And I think that's a healthy balance that we all can, I know myself, I can absorb.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh, for adding all these details. I think maybe one thing I struggled as a young advocate, I mean, I've been in the movement for 6 years, is that sometimes I just lose hope. And I think, okay, so all these campaigns have been achieved, but like animals are still suffering and like this is still a big problem. We're still outnumbered. But then I think when I see campaigns like yours, I'm like, yeah, we can actually make change when you can really see big numbers and big progress. And I feel like we kind of need people in the movement like yourselves. And we need more advocates to have faith in the fact that if we make programs, if we press on the right levers, if we're just innovative and just keep going in the right direction, this is the only way we can actually make some progress. Because the last thing I want for the movement is for people to just feel helpless and powerless.
Sophia, I got to tell you, sometimes I get down too. And we all know the numbers of animals, and we all see the latest undercover investigation that comes out, and our heart breaks. What I can tell you is that there should be hope. And let me share just a couple reasons why I believe that there's real hope. Again, I'm going to focus in the United States just because I happen to know this country a bit more than others. There has not been a new cage operation in the egg industry that has been built for years on end now. No new cage is even built because the egg industry itself recognizes that the future is cage free. I can't think of pork producers that are even putting in new gestation crates. As much as they despise everything that many of us stand for in our lives, and they fought me personally and the various organizations that worked on Prop 12, and they tried to overturn that law. For those who may not know, to the Supreme Court. Now they're trying to overturn a law in Congress with the EATS Act. They failed every step of the way so far. Hopefully they fail with the EATS Act. Even those who are fighting us are not putting in these new operations because it doesn't make any business sense, because they see that the laws are always going in one direction, and they see that the corporate policies are all going in one direction. And so when we see just agribusiness not putting in the worst practices, at least the United States, that is an example of how even they are seeing progress that they fought, and progress they probably don't agree with, but progress nonetheless. So I certainly do feel a lot of hope in that way. And I'll say, by the way, on the plant-based side, we're talking about numbers of animals going up. You mentioned that, Sophia. I mean, when I became vegan, I don't know, 22 years ago, I was putting ketchup on tofu and sticking in the microwave for a minute. Like that was my meal. And you really had to care a lot back then to go vegan. Nowadays, even though like we all know the numbers, like, oh, plant-based industry, is it going up, is it going down, what's the trajectory? But let's just look at where we're at. Every major grocery store now has a plant-based milk section, has a plant-based meat section. Most of them have plant-based cheeses. Virtually everyone has plant-based eggs now. Like, imagine if we were all, again, gathered together 15 years ago and we said that's what the future would be. We'd be like, wow, we've made some progress here. And that's the reality. We have made that progress. Again, we definitely have to go further, no doubt about it. But we should be proud of how far we've come. And when we think about sadness about how much further we have to go, let's just think about how far we came, though. And I think that should lift our spirits a bit.
Wow, that's powerful. I'm going to like crop this and listen to it whenever I want a little pickup. So thank you so much, Josh. And I also think that another thing to remember is like we achieved it with such limited resources in comparison to the industry. We have nothing. We probably have like less than 1%. I don't know the numbers, but I think that we should be really proud of ourselves. Absolutely. So thank you so much for pointing all this out. So before we move on to the Q&A section, because we do have a global audience and you have spoken quite a bit about the US, I think I have seen some of your work applying globally, but I'm just really curious to hear from you whether you think that your work can be applicable to other regions, especially in Asia, where there are so many more farmed animals, but so much harder to make that change. And then whether we actually can make as much success in those regions.
Well, the good thing about global corporations is that while they might be publicly traded in the United States, so we can work within the laws of the United States, which are favorable to shareholders, we can encourage them to move not just the United States, but on a global level. So when we work with a company to go cage-free globally, that means cage-free in Asia too. And while countries in Asia don't have the same type of laws that allow shareholders to do what we're doing, one might think, gosh, then are we stuck there? But it's just simply not true. We'll just use the example of Compass Group that we brought up earlier, the world's largest food service company. You know, we have all probably been into a big university dining operation, like how big that is, serving tens of thousands of students. Just picture 40,000 of those. That's what it does. So they operate throughout Asia. And when they have commitments to go cage-free there, they're not sourcing cage-free eggs in the United States to be shipped to China and other countries in Asia. They source from Asia. And that is driving markets in Asia to shift. In fact, and I'm not making this up, the word of the year, according to the Chinese egg industry this past year, was cage-free. And I know cage-free is maybe 2 words, but go with me on this. The egg industry in China itself proclaimed that to be true. And it's not because they came to some moral conclusion on an issue. What they have found is that corporations in Asia, many of them based in the United States, are enacting global policies, are saying, listen, egg suppliers in China, we have a policy to go cage-free. Go with us on this policy. Start making changes like have been occurring throughout the EU, throughout the United States, and other parts of the world. And to give the Chinese egg industry credit, they are beginning to change. In fact, now there are numerous larger scale cage-free operations that can actually supply these big egg buyers that didn't even exist 2 years ago, 5 years ago. So that is a major reason why, in my humble opinion, at least for whatever I can bring to the table to help animals in other parts of the world, that's why this strategy is as effective, in my humble opinion, as it comes, because corporations are going to be more powerful than my voice in Asia. And when they demand cage-free, changes start happening in China, and they actually are happening. We're seeing it. This is not some theory. We're actually seeing it firsthand, these egg companies beginning to change there.
Wow, this is fascinating. I'm sure that people want more information about this, but I really want to open up the floor for Q&A because this is a really big part of our community meetup, and it's really important to us that your questions are being heard. So thank you so much, Josh, for Fireside chatting with me. And I'm going to read out 3 questions that were submitted to us via the registration form because they came to us first. But then I will get back to the questions that you folks posted in the chat. And if we have time, we will also open up the floor for you folks to ask more questions. So the first question I have for you, Josh, is the Accountability Board seems to significantly downplay its focus on animal issues, at least in the limited public messaging on the website. What is the reasoning behind that?
So we're honest 100% on our website about what we do. What I can tell you is that what is on our website covers in a broad way all of the issues that we work on. So rather than like focusing on every single issue and here's a link for this one and that one, I just didn't think that's most efficient, frankly. What we do is we're honest about looking at issues like corporate governance and other issues that companies have made pledges on, and as investors, working with companies to fulfill them. And I mean, listen, we work on climate change issues as an example, and we just had a victory that is a very rare thing to happen on Wall Street as an example. So we took on Jack in the Box, and this is public. Jack in the Box is a big fast food chain in the United States, has thousands of locations. They never revealed any greenhouse gas emissions. They had never revealed any plans to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, which, by the way, is an oddity in the restaurant world. Most restaurants do that. And so we filed a proposal asking them to be open about their greenhouse gas emissions and have a plan. They refused to work with us on it. So we went to a vote. And let me be clear, less than 3% of shareholder proposals ever win. And yet we won. We beat Jack in the Box. We persuaded more investors than they could persuade themselves. And at their shareholder meeting, they were forced to acknowledge that they lost. They lost the vote to the accountability board when it came to a proposal related to climate change. So we do work on numerous issues, climate change being another. And the common denominator of all the issues is that everything we press with companies make things better for shareholders. And everything that we also work on makes things simultaneously better for the world in some way.
Wow, massive congratulations, by the way. And folks, this is like super recent. So you're like one of the first hearing about this. So thank you so much for sharing this joyous victory, Josh, and big congratulations. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think that very often organizations, like as animal advocates, we expect the websites to be just about animals and like very clearly pro-farmed animals. But I think what we also don't realize that other people also care about other issues like board governance and shareholders. And I think it's great that you have chosen to be like so transparent about like why your work is important on your website, even though it doesn't necessarily like scream, oh, we are for farmed animals. So I'm really glad that you addressed that. The next question that I have is, what advice would you give to somebody who's starting in the advocacy world and wants to have an impact on legislative campaigns and policy? What studies or knowledge would you recommend to possess?
Oh my gosh. So did you say democracy, Sophia, in the democracy world? Is that what you said?
I think it was advocacy.
Oh, advocacy world. Sorry.
Advocacy,
I misheard. I apologize. So if I'm hearing right, advocacy world when it comes to like passing laws, is that right? Is that what I heard, Sophia?
Yeah. So who wants to have an impact on legislative campaigns?
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you for the question. That is a very critical question. So I will speak regarding countries where there are representatives. Some countries, of course, they're authoritarian regimes, so this does not apply to that. So I'm talking about countries like the United States, where I live, and others where you can actually meet with your legislators. Here's what I would highly recommend. Literally anyone can do this. Reach out to your local legislators. Reach out to your members, like in the United States as an example, members of Congress, your Congress member, your senator. And guess what? When you're a constituent, meaning you're not reaching, like, I live in California. So like if I'm reaching out to someone representing people in Vermont, they'd be like, I'm not meeting with you. I'm not gonna waste my time. But if you reach out to your own local legislators and the person who represents your state or your province, they often meet with you. And at minimum, their staff member who represents whatever issue you're asking about often meets with you. And the fact that someone reaches out, asks for a meeting, and let's say does a video meeting or even travels to the Capitol to meet, that matters so much because it shows how much the person cares. And they know when people care, there is an intensity about their caring that it is contagious. So you don't want to upset somebody who's taken all that effort, because that person is going to organize family, friends, and community on this issue. So we want that person on our side. And I got to tell you, most of the time, it's like a real respectful conversation. And I'm sure knowing the folks who are part of this call, you all are pros. It's like it's dressing professional, acting professional, it's things that you all know and you all do every day. That really matters to staff members, because when they go to the Congress member, senator, her himself, they say, yeah, we met with this Sophia person, and yeah, she's in our district. Listen, she's professional, she's thoughtful, she really cares about this issue. So we should really raise this more so within our office. Those basic things anyone can do. I don't care what your job is. You know, my brother sells medical equipment. My dad is retired. They can meet with their legislators. It doesn't matter. You don't need to be the biggest expert in the world. They just need to know you care enough to do it. And that's all I would ask anyone to do.
Wow, so simple and yet so powerful. I love it. Thank you for suggesting it, Josh. Okay, I'm really appreciative that you folks posted more questions. So Kathy, I can see that you raised your hand, so we're gonna get back to you. Just one question that I have from the registration submission is do you have any future-oriented thoughts on how animal advocacy will change in 5 years? And for example, how will AI impact advocacy, or like any thoughts that you have?
So I hope that AI, and I believe it will come to fruition, will help related to alternative proteins, because a lot of the amazing, brilliant minds work on alternative proteins. We're sometimes limited to our human brain. And what I'm talking about is the type of proteins that can be used in alternative proteins, whether it's plant proteins or doing things like precision fermentation, cultivated meat. We have brilliant people working there. At the same time, I think they would be the first ones to say it would be really helpful to have AI working on this too. And that's where I hope AI can help more than anywhere else. I also believe that AI can do a fairly a faster job of analyzing documents that have been put out there by companies and seeing how they've changed over the years. You know, things that were true before are no longer true now. Basic research is what I would say that AI can do much faster, presumably, than us meager human brains can do. But what I would say overall, my biggest hope is certainly in the alternative protein sphere.
That's very insightful. Thank you so much, Josh. Okay, this is it for the registration questions, and we still have just under 15 minutes. So, Kathy, you raised your hand. So would you like to ask a question, please?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Josh. And finally, it took me half an hour to get my video working, and I'm a technology person. It only happens with Google Meet. So I missed a little bit of what you said, but I wanted to mention something about the AI. You know, Lewis Ballard of Open Philanthropy did an article about AI and animals, and I haven't read it yet, but I don't know if you've seen it, but he always writes great stuff. So you might want to look at that. But you mentioned the word democracy before. And, you know, I've spent 16 years at the ASPCA working on factory farming, and got just so discouraged, like many other people. I want to talk a little bit about the politicians. I'm not as optimistic as you are about meeting with these people. If you remember, I think it was 2014 or 2012, Jon Stewart did a segment where Chris Christie, there was 97% of his constituency, I think it was 97, voted in favor of ending gestation crates in New Jersey, and he vetoed it because he wanted to be president, and he was going to Iowa, which is the biggest state for pig production, right? So was he listening to his constituents? No. There's so much money from big agriculture that goes to the politicians. We know that, American Farm Bureau, all those other places. Do these corporations also give money to the politicians? And as a shareholder, would you have access to that information? And might that be another avenue? Because we're talking about, you know, huge changes in terms of how the United States operates. And when you have Biden listening to the politicians, or, you know, any president, and not making changes that have been proposed that would be good for the animals, it's just, you know, I mean, so aggravating. So as you can tell, I get really worked up about it.
You should be worked up, Kathy, and it's good to see you. And just, I know we're pals, but with everybody, just thank you so much for what you've done for so many years and bringing the issue of farm animals to a higher level at the ASPCA over 16 years. You've been tremendous, and I know the folks who care about farm animals are grateful that you did that for sure. You're right. For those who didn't know about the Governor Chris Christie thing, there's legislation I worked on and others worked on in New Jersey to ban gestation crates. passed. Democrats, Republicans passed it up to be signed by Governor Christie at the time, and he vetoed it. Kathy's exactly right. What I would argue there is that Governor Christie's constituents in his head were Iowa factory farmers at the time, because he was running for president at the time, and Iowa was the first caucus state. And so I think he was probably listening to his constituents, though I think his constituents were a little bit twisted compared to his actual home constituents. What I would say is this, is that you're right that political contributions are a real problem in the United States, and it's a shame it exists. And I think it's made politics worse in our country. Now, do agribusiness giants give money to politicians? Absolutely. Absolutely they do. Are there animal folks that are starting to try to catch up as much as they can? Yes. There are now animal folks who are now more than ever getting involved in this political process in a similar way that agribusiness does, by giving donations, by doing fundraisers, basic things that any American could do. And yes, agribusiness has a bit more money than a lot of us do, so they can do a little bit better, but we can start catching up a little bit. What I can also say is that what agribusiness does is they organize pork producers to visit state houses. They absolutely do that too. And just by showing up, that actually matters. And I think what we can do more of is show up to that extent. You know what? We might not be able to reach the Chris Christies in the world, and I'm with you, Kathy. That's be a tough one. But we're going to reach a lot of, we can reach a lot of other politicians that don't have in mind a particular constituency is already bad for us. I firmly believe animal issues should be a bipartisan issue, bipartisan. And that's how, at least when I work in politics and when I work to pass ballot measures and state laws, I didn't view one party better than another. I wanted everybody to support animals. We need everybody, big tent. So we need more Democrats right now to make animal issues a bigger issue. I mean, for those folks who are progressive on the call, and we might think, gosh, we're so much better than those conservatives on animals. Well, guess what? The Biden administration tried to overturn California's Prop 12. When I spent a year of my life working on that Supreme Court case, part of my work was opposing the Biden administration, who's trying to overturn Proposition 12. And you know what? It was conservative justices like Amy Coney Barrett, like Justice Thomas, that supported Prop 12. And that's one of the reasons why we won. And so we have to make animal issues a bigger issue for Democrats. And on the other side, guess what? There are a lot of Republicans who are doing a lot of good work. There's a Republican named Representative Anna Paulina Luna in Florida. You all, I believe probably most of the folks on this call are probably progressive. And you all probably disagree with most things that she probably stands for. She probably respectfully disagrees with a lot of what we all stand for. However, she's very pro-animal. And she just led a Republican letter against the EATS Act. The EATS Act is legislation in the United States. It's EATS, the EATS Act. She led a letter against it. This legislation would wipe out California's Prop 12 and all the other important farm animal laws in the United States. And this Republican led Republicans to oppose this. And there was 10 other Republicans to sign on. Before that, there were 16 Republicans to sign on to another letter against the EATS Act. I only bring this up to say is that we just have to all get involved. And I don't care if you're representative, at least, and again, talking the United States, apologies, it happens to be where I live. I don't care if you're representative, Republican, Democrat, we collectively raise the issue at a higher level. It's harder for them to ignore, even if agribusiness gives them more money. What happens if, like, listen, agribusiness did give me $5,000, $10,000, but gosh, I'm getting like dozens of people who are meeting my office and they all care about animal issues. Like, okay, like I feel like I got to start moving in this direction a bit more.
Thanks so much, Josh, and Kathy, thank you so much for the question. I think that was quite insightful and in-depth. For the interest of time, I will move on to another question. Hopefully we'll get maybe two more. So Christy asked, she said, fascinating and important work. When it comes to having a lot of shares, in order to be influential, how does the accountability board accomplish that? Put differently, do individuals buy shares and connect with the accountability board or something else?
That's a great question, Christy. So we buy the shares ourselves. So we are shareholders as an organization. And as an organization, because we own the shares, we're able to do the things that I've described. And in different countries, there are different rules about how much money you need per company to be able to do what we're doing. In the United States, it's $25,000 per company. You need more than that because if you dip below 25,000, even for a second, you lose the ability to do this. So we have, so what organizations would do is have a buffer of probably about 40,000 per company, but we would sometimes have more than that, sometimes less than that. But overall, that's just the rules. And we certainly have enough per company to be able to work with these companies in a meaningful way.
Fantastic. That's very clear. Thank you so much, Josh. There is a question from Colin here. Um, Devil's advocate here, spicy. These shareholder proposals sound like they can take a long time to make change. Wouldn't this also legitimize using animals for food? Can you expand on how this approach helps end the exploitation of farmed animals? Thanks.
So this is coming from someone who's been vegan for 22 years. Sophia mentioned I co-founded Eat Just that makes plant-based eggs and plant-based, also new products, by the way, plant-based mayonnaise, plant-based dressings. Also, as Sophia mentioned, the first company to ever sell cultivated meat in the world. So that's my background. I also worked as an undercover investigator. I worked in factory farms and slaughterhouses. And I personally shackled chickens in the slaughterhouse as I was hooked up with the hidden camera. Those memories drive me more than anything else. And what I can tell you is that when we know literally billions of animals globally are suffering, and when you, in your own hands, feel the amount of pain that they've been in throughout their life and see the suffering they're going through at the very end, you will do things to reduce their suffering. And I don't believe we should ignore their pain and their suffering when we can reduce it as much as we can. I will also add, I've never known any issue of social prominence, maybe you all have, I haven't, where society has gone from 0 to 100 overnight. I don't know any issue. I'll just tell you my dad talks to me about this work. My dad, he fought in the civil rights movement in the United States. He was part of a Jewish contingent of people in Pennsylvania in the north that would go down south and march with African Americans. And because of white people marching alongside black people, the black people were less likely to get beat up. And that's what my dad did. And he has literally the wounds to show when he actually was harmed during those protests. He also taught about Indian independence. He taught about the Holocaust. At least what he has told me about the issues that he has spent decades of his life working on, both as a teacher and before that as an activist himself, is that none of those issues, people just didn't think about the issue. And then as soon as they thought about it, the changes just happened like this. 0 of them. So if somehow folks think, hey, we're going to open the eyes of people to animals, and all of a sudden, poof, everything is just going to disappear that's ever caused harm in animals, I just respectfully don't see that happening. I also don't see that happening on other issues either. I mean, whether like Amnesty International works to prevent torture of prisoners of war. Does Amnesty International believe that those prisoners of war and political prisoners, does Amnesty International believe that political prisoners should be locked up? They probably don't, but they still work to make sure they don't get tortured in prison. They still work to make sure they're fed and given water and they can see their families and have a lawyer. I don't think that Amnesty would say, hey, I think it makes a better argument if we just ignore them, ignore their suffering, so we have a better argument we can make. We can speed up the process by just relegating those people to suffering. So that I feel the same, I feel a very similar way to the issues that we've talked about today. And I will say the last thing I'll say, Sophia, on this, is that if you look at companies that have done really well in improving the lives of animals, they simultaneously are the companies that have moved forward on plant-based. As an example, a company like Chipotle was the first to move away from gestation crates. Now, I'm not saying Chipotle is perfect. They have their issues, certainly on the procurement of chicken, but they were first at least to avoid from gestation crates. I don't think it was such a coincidence they were the first to offer like a prominent plant-based item in all their locations, the sofrito, which I think is pretty good. I also find this to be the case with the food service companies. You know, Unilever, that company we talked about earlier, having a global cage-free policy. Guess what? They were one of the first global conglomerates to offer plant-based mayonnaise and plant-based ice creams. So I think that even for the companies, they're seeing that this stuff goes hand to hand. So I appreciate that question. It's a very important conversation, and hope that made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I feel like Josh should have booked you for like the whole day because everyone just has so many questions. And I'm so sorry that we weren't able to address it. But I wonder, Josh, maybe if I could send you some of the questions, you could write us some notes and maybe I could send it as a follow-up email so that you feel like your question's been addressed if it's not too much to ask of your time. And then we could put together a really nice email to everyone so that people are more aware. I really appreciate those answers, Josh, and I've personally have learned so much. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Sophia. Thanks everybody for tuning in. It really means a lot. And thank you. I see so many of you devoting your lives for animals. Just thank you all for everything we're doing. You know, we're all, as I hope you know, we're all in this together. I'm cheering for you. I hope you are so successful. And again, thanks for tuning in. It's so good to see everybody.
I really had the community feel, Josh, because of what you shared. So thank you so much for taking the time. And I'm sure that everyone who's watching the recording and everyone who's been here with us and asked questions has also learned a lot. And you can see how inspired people are. Look at all those hearts. That's amazing. We're crushing it. Team Farmed Animals. Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of the day. Please come to our other events if you enjoyed this one. And Josh, thank you so much again for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.